Louis, you want to run this?
Sure. I don't see, nobody's added anything to the agenda.
Well, the
There's stuff in the next meeting selection.
future, yeah.
And we can probably go over the beta stuff. I didn't put it on there though.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah. So I think Ben, you added the first one. Ben, are you? Yeah, let me pin Ben. I thought we added that one.
I was already chatting with him. I just sent him a message.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
John, do you know what this new summer is? I'm just trying
Yeah,
to parse it.
Ben just joined.
Yeah, that's me. My apologies. So yeah, so the discussion in that issue. Let's see. Yeah, so we had someone open a PR for this, and this is something we had talked about before. Right now, when you add the istio.io data plane mode label to a namespace, right, that enrolls all the pods in the namespace. And so it makes sense that to some degree that you should be able to apply that label to an individual pod and also enroll that pod, right? So we can put it on the namespace or an individual pod. Either way would work. Right now, it doesn't work either way. It only works for the namespace. So the PR is to say, look, let's just have the thing compose, right, where it could be on namespace or pod or both. And then we just resolve the semantics the way we would want to do it in that. Now, that's actually a pretty simple change because the CNI at the underlying layer is only adding individual pods always anyway. So the namespace is just sort of an abstraction. It doesn't really create any additional combinatorics or load that is difficult, which you can see from the PR actually. There's some test cases in there. So it's really a question of, do we want to support this thing also in the pod? Because it isn't really a heavy lift to do so, and it makes some amount of like UX consistency sense. The other thing that's part of this is we also probably want to use that label in the future for the disable or a pod opt out. Because right now we're using an annotation we're using a different entire annotation for opt out. Which is a little confusing because we could just use the same label for inclusion or exclusion, depending on what value you pass, which I think is much more consistent. And also, we don't want people using that annotation that we currently use for opt-out because it is used by the CNI to actually, as a status, to say, yes, I have captured this pod success with IP tables and all that. So we don't want CNI as an automatic thing using that as a status to indicate successful capture, but also tell people to apply it manually to disable, to opt out. So I want to get rid of the annotation. So we're going to use this label probably for opt out at the pod level, which really just leaves the question of, should we also use it for opt in at the pod level since it's already for opt in at the namespace level? Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, so basically we just want to have the label as like the singular thing to indicate data plane mode ambient for opt-in at namespace or pod level. The pod level could be optional, or data plane mode disabled or none to opt out at the pod level if we want to do that. It's just really, basically it just reduces down to, do we want to use that label for opt-in at the pod level since we're going to be using it for literally everything else?
But so are we still using the annotation and the label or just a label?
We will only tell people in documentation to use the label. The annotation will be a pure internal status that users will never apply.
Okay.
Or we would prefer them.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So the annotation, and we don't actually need to rename it, but logically we could say it's CNI has actuated the intent to use ambient. True, and there's no other value.
Right, intent versus it's actually captured.
I may have missed this. Sorry, I was reading something else. Is there a way to say data plane mode not ambient to disable at the pod level, for example?
Not yet, but that's what I wanted to do. Right, is to actually just have a data plane mode disable and have that take over what the annotation currently does.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I was thinking as well. The only concern is you say data plane mode disabled, and then you get a sidecar because you enabled sidecars or something, and then you're like, what the hell I said, disabled, because it's really
Yeah.
like ambient data
Yeah.
plane. But
I agree, but like right now they're completely like data plane mode does not have anything to do with sidecars today. It's
yeah,
completely.
no, I get it. Yeah,
I agree, and we could maybe later do something like data plane mode sidecar, but I didn't want to get into all that. Like we don't for now. It's like two separate worlds,
Yeah.
and it's a new label, so we can budget. And I don't think that will confuse sidecar people. It might confuse ambient people a little bit coming into it new, but it's better than what we got, I think.
I mean, I completely agree to getting of allocation and not exposing the label, but in terms of the impact, I think we should consider, first of all, other implementation of ambient data plane and the sidecar cases, because they are, we are not completely different. I mean, there is a case where users may choose to use sidecars. There is a possibility to use other sidecars, not necessarily Istio sidecars, because there are other mesh products that may exist. So we may need to be able to indicate to CNIs that, whatever are the user expectations. So we should keep, I mean, I agree, initially just ambient and none or whatever. I don't know if none is the right solution, but ambient or anything else to indicate if ambient should be enabled as it is. But we should take into account other values that may be added. So basically leave it as either as an open string or opaque string or something else to allow other things to be plugged.
I think Lynn, you were next.
Okay, does anyone want to respond to Carsten? I was waiting for, if not, I'll go. Okay, so I have a question. I think I'm agree with what Ben you were summarizing. I have a question. If we change this ambient it's still the IO/data plane mode to be a label on the pod. Is pod the only scope? What if I label on my service? I'm just thinking loud because I'm using use Waypoint a lot recently. So what's the scope of the label, and is it only for the pod? And if I label it on the pod and service, how does it work if I label it on both? Or maybe I label on some of my pods but not all the pods for the service?
Yeah. If if we wanted to do it that way, but again, like you could still get into that state today by enabling it the namespace and disabling specific pods, like half the backing pods in the service. Like you can do, it doesn't change the states you can create today to do this, right? It just might make people can still do that, right? They could label the namespace for ambient inclusion and disable half the pods with the annotation today, which would give you a weird state, right? It doesn't change the combinatorics that we allow. Unless we want to, if you it's the same thing, right? Whether you say allow it namespace, disable per pod, or enable per pod, right? It comes out to the same thing. I don't think there's any state that you can't express in one versus the other. So this is mostly just about making the labeling consistent, but it doesn't introduce any new states that I can see. And the PR actually has some test cases that cover the various combinatorics, right? It's standard Kubernetes composition, right? Namespace versus pod, which one wins, if they're both the same, whatever. Like it comes out to the same combinatorics, and it doesn't introduce any new cases that we don't already support by virtue of having a pod level opt out.
Maybe we only support it for pod, I guess, to make it clear.
Yeah, Lynn, it never applied to service.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just make sure it's for the pod. I think that make it easy for people to understand the scope is only for the pod.
Yeah. And that doesn't really change, like I said, that doesn't really change the CNI logic anyway, because the CNI essentially takes the namespace label and then breaks it down to, I need to do this for every pod. So it really doesn't change a whole lot from the application of the actual redirection to do this. It's already sort of an abstraction to talk about at the namespace level. So, and that composes, right? Namespace has pods. That's the hierarchy that people expect.
No, do we need this change before 1.22 ships? because it's additional risk, the slate. I'm trying to think, I mean, who want to disable? What are the scenarios they would want to disable? I guess when their pods in ambient doesn't work, that's when they want to use this disable, but maybe they want the other pods in the namespace be part of ambient.
Well, we also don't support IP exclusions today, or port exclusions. So imagine an application that has port conflicts. I know on Azure we've got Redis that has, well, it's different ports, but you can imagine a scenario where there are port, some sort of IP or port issues. You don't want them to be using ambient for whatever reason, and so you want to exclude that particular pod.
Okay, that makes sense. So that matches the user from Saka was reporting to one of his pod. He wants to exclude, but not on the other ones. Carsten.
Yeah, anyone using IP tables or anything in the network, in the pod network, probably should use it, because any IP table you use will interface. Since we're applying now IP tables in the container, in the pod namespace. Absolutely, any use is super dangerous and needs to be opted out.
We
Not
need
only
a way to
Istio
support
type, but
yeah.
I mean, it's obviously a very low incremental risk for 122 to add this support. You could go either way, but seeing as the PR is done and there are valid use cases for opting certain workloads out, as we've seen and we know, it seems very low incremental risk. Right?
I think the PR is done in the way to opt in, not opt out, but we
there's still the opt out. The annotation for opt out is still outstanding even with this PR. This PR simply adds ambient mode at the pod level, which is a relatively minimal, low risk change. There's still an open issue separately to actually drop the use of the annotation as an opt out by adding another value to the label. But we would need to do that at the pod level anyway, so it kind of comes out to the same thing.
What happens if I use an invalid value at the pod level right now for the label?
If you use an invalid value for I don't know what it does now, but I think we just we are only matching if it's a value we expect. But I'd have to go look.
Okay. Well, I would probably say if we can do the opt out cleanly with the label, right? Because we already process it that way, as you said.
Right.
Then I think we should just do that and include it. It's very marginal. So we just got to pick a value. None is probably the right term to use, and not disabled.
Fair enough.
Costin, to your point about allowing for other values in the future, right? It's an enum. Obviously, we have to give some thought about how vendors might do their own data plane modes and how they might register those with mesh config or something like that, right? So that some understood interop. But we can certainly adopt a convention, right? That if vendors want to do something, they should prefix it with their product name, right? Which is very unlikely to conflict.
My suggestion was to change it from enum to string, basically.
What is a string?
Well, it's also enum, kind of depends on how it is implemented.
Oh, that's the internal implementation detail might be an enum, but that's not exposed to any user, right? The only API is the label.
Yeah, if the API is a string, that will allow, because the idea is that like multiple meshes and other things, that we need to have a way to indicate, you cannot have 5 different annotation, one for each product that you're using. Anyway, I think that was the thing.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, so by label it as long, does it also means I'm automatically opt out for waypoint as well? Because for waypoint you have to be in zTunnel capture first.
Yes.
Okay.
Like data plane mode equals none is I'm not in the mesh.
Right. So I'm just saying this, if they happen to label use waypoint, that would be ignored if the data plane mode is none.
Correct.
I don't think that's correct. I think the waypoint selection is based on different criteria, because the sidecar may be excluded from ambient, but still implements the H1 protocol. So is there different paths to select if you go?
I think we still have to resolve with data plane mode equals sidecar, right? Which I think we're not trying to do right now.
That is
right. Not until we fixed the sidecar interrupt, right? For the beta.
Yeah.
I see. But isn't a different label like the auto MTLS used for deciding if you use H1 or not? I thought that's how implementation works. A different label I thought it's used for selecting if the tunnel is using or not using H1.
ztunnel just uses the fact that the other workload is enrolled using data plane mode, right, to detect whether it should use H1 or not.
But that's through a label on the pod.
Effectively. Yeah.
There's two mechanisms. There's the sidecars stick a label, and then the ambient things, we use the annotation, which is the source of truth from the CNI. So the sidecars say, I have a sidecar, basically, which is how auto MTLS works. That's injected. And then the ambient ones is stuck on there by the CNI.
So you stick an annotation instead of a label on the sidecar, and so do you want to use this
So
label for everything?
So I don't know if we want to use the label for everything or not, but the label is injected for sidecars, and it's dynamically written at pod creation for CNI because we don't have an injector. So, sorry, I think it's a label for the second one. The CNI one is an annotation.
Okay, so it's a label or annotation, but it's a different one than this label. So
yeah,
if we want to use the same thing for both, I mean, I was correct that it's not this label that is used, but something else. Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to use like mixed co-mingled user API and like status effectively.
From a launch perspective of a new feature, I think it's really important that we get this codified and right at launch, because these are probably going to be some of the highest touch APIs and used by users. So you want to make sure that we're consistent and clear. And arguably, I think it's important to have that done for 122. Do we have any thought? Do we think that that's possible? I guess the question's to Ben.
Yeah, I can get on that. I would like that too, and I think it would be good to do that just for the sake of consistency. I want I think we should do that. And I don't think actually doing the disabled for the label will be difficult. It's essentially just doing it's just essentially replacing all the spots where you look at the annotation and look at the label for a specific value instead. Probably mostly test code.
So I try to summarize our decision based on what I heard. Please let us know if it's wrong or incorrect in any way.
Yep, it looks.
I think we have to decide what data plane mode equals none and istio inject enabled semantics are. I presume istio inject will still enable sidecars even if data plane mode equals none.
Yes,
yeah, because that's the
today.
same as because even with same data plane mode equals ambient on your namespace, when you have sidecar injection enabled on your namespace, you still get sidecar.
Right. So the only thing that means is at some point, if we did introduce data plane mode equals sidecar, that we would have to change the semantic of data plane mode equals none from being not an override to inject to possibly being an override for inject.
Yeah. Do we want a separate? Do we want labels on? Do we want them to be separate worlds with their own labels and they're sort of different, or do we want to unify? I don't have an opinion about unification yet, and I think we should just defer that because this is pretty straightforward to just keep the same logic and make it more consistent with ambient. And I'll let tomorrow have its own problems, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the right thing too, because in the world of migration, what we would probably have, and if we have istio inject equals like istio inject enabled and data plane mode equals ambient enabled, which wins right now?
Yeah.
Well, which of those two is winning right now?
Right now, it is the sidecar, label.
Yeah, okay, and that's probably correct, right? Yep. Because you would go and turn on ambient, it would effectively not do anything until you remove the sidecar label.
Yeah, and if we wanted to unify these into like one label for sidecar and ambient, that would essentially be deprecating the old labels for sidecar anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's correct. Okay, let's just make sure we document that correctly for people. Otherwise, like they might That doesn't matter for 122, but later on they will definitely fumble over that.
We do have that documented even right now for ambient.
Well, we don't support sidecars and ambient code at beta level in 122 in the same cluster.
Correct, but we do have that documented. I just saw it.
Yeah, no, that's true. Okay, okay, I think we're good there then.
Yeah, Keith, you had a question about data plane mode inherit. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about something like it's not super well thought out, but I'm thinking if you're a platform admin and you, let's not a platform admin, but you're somebody and you just say, I want you're in the middle of a migration, and you want to say my pod to just use whatever the namespace thing. Well, no, that's just the name.
Or probably more like the cluster-wide defaults, right, Keith?
Yeah, or something like that. Just something to say, take whatever the thing above me is using.
Yeah,
Isn't that
I would say
effectively
that's
just not
Yeah.
labeled?
Yeah,
Yeah.
John is saying. Yeah,
no. That's not quite the same thing, right? Well, you may still have workloads not in the mesh by default, Mitch, but you still want to take the system-wide default for what the implementation is. So Ben, for the moment, I would just reserve the names inherit and default.
Okay. I mean, all our stuff right now, there's no inheritance model. It's all the lowest level wins, right? The pod level annotations win over the namespace if there's a conflict. Like that's current state. If we want to change that for like disable and stuff, right? So like if you enable the namespace and disable the pod level wins. And if we did it for the inverse case, today the pod level would still win. If we want to do something different later, we could, but that's just letting you know, like the current state is the lowest level wins on that front. Or if there's a collision between annotations at the namespace versus the pod level.
Yeah, let's just reserve default and inherit. We can decide there's semantics later.
Okay.
Keith, does that work for you?
Oh yeah, for sure. It was like I said, it was just it popped into my brain while we were discussing, and I didn't flesh it out fully. I think in 9% of the cases, like unset's going to be based on the same as inherit, but there may be some edge cases where it may be useful.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Should we move on to destination principle? Your topic, Keith.
Sure. So wanted to give folks here an update. I think it's Whitney and Daniel have been working on telemetry. I think both are on vacation right now, but they've been working on telemetry. The PR got merged yesterday, so it's I know there are 4 things to change, so it's like 75% done. But the thing that's missing that I've been working on is destination principle. Because of the implementation details in how we are doing HTTP Connect and waypoints right now, it's currently very hard to be able to get the destination principle from the wire because there are 2 different internal listeners plus 1 original real listener. But for this purpose, for the sake of this conversation, there's a level of indirection because we're doing internal listener stuff, and I can't seem to get the filter state to propagate backward appropriately. So at the moment, destination principle is unknown. Or I think actually at the moment on master it's set to it's set to the waypoint service account, but there doesn't seem to be a great way to be able to get the server SAN, and so wanted to let folks here know that that's currently the blocker that I've got on that. I'm still kind of iterating, but I'm at this point I'm somewhat out of ideas. I think we were discussing on John's doc. It's probably not a blocker for 122, but it's obviously something that would be really great to have for nothing else besides parity. I was talking with Quat, and Quat suggested potentially just have the SCOD put the expected SAN. I guess that would technically be an option. It would be okay, but I don't love that. I like the idea of telemetry matching what's actually being received on the wire. So that's current state of things. If there happen to be people who are better at Envoy than me, which is probably everybody here, then feel free to. I'm open to suggestions about how to accomplish it. But if not, then yeah.
How did this work in Sidecar? Because it would have had, well, yeah, I guess that would have been much easier in Sidecar. Never mind. That's a stupid question.
Yeah, it's the internal listener piece. So we've got to get filter state from the
Right,
second
yeah.
correct originate listener all the way back to the main one.
But it's not it's actually the listener side that we care about, right? It's the downstream, the upstream side that we care about, like the destination.
Correct. So all the logic is in the main listener, which is the first internal listener, but we don't actually get the SAN. We don't get the certificate until we get to the second internal listener, the originate one. That's doing the HTTP connect.
My quad is definitely the person who's probably the most familiar with that stuff. Anyone else have any ideas?
Yeah, I was going back and forth with him a little bit yesterday, but I think he got busy with other things. One thing I wanted to add is that sandwiching, this is another good use case for sandwich, because I think it removes that extra layer of indirection where the sandwich Z tunnel will take care of the origination. So, but we actually don't get the SAN.
Yeah, there's no
SAN,
Z-tunnel
yeah.
doesn't know HTTP, and then you would still need to pass from the sandwich the metadata back, which we actually don't have. We only have in the sandwich the other side. It's a bit harder to do the metadata for outbound because you don't know the metadata until the upstream is established. So it's kind of
yeah, it would have to be in something like socket metadata or sockops.
Yeah, does proxy, is it only one way?
Yes.
Well, that sucks. If it was connect, we could send it in the response headers.
So we have
Right.
SOCs in G-tunnel. So if you enable SOCs, you can pass metadata.
Backwards?
Not backwards, Gustin.
So what do you mean backward?
So in SOCs, right, like you send headers, right? But it's send when you open the connection.
Yes.
But in what we need is the identity of the principal to come back, like in a header in the response.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Yeah, SOCs doesn't have.
Yeah, none of them have it. That's why Connect has it, which is super nice. Right?
Yeah, so this is the main. So the issue here is not necessarily with the actual like where this lives. It's actually in the waypoint single approach. Because either way, you've got to pass the metadata backward from whatever is doing the originate connection.
So is there fundamental issues in Envoy here, or it's just really hard? It seems like it should just be hard. But I also don't know that much about the Envoy stuff.
I've been digging through source code, and it feels like it should be possible if I'm understanding documentation correctly. So basically, when you do internal listener stuff, there's all the filter state is shared. But it might be an ordering concern with where we're doing stats. So we're doing stats in the main listener, where all the logic is, but there is we don't actually do the actual HTTP connect and get the SAN, like that certificate, until we get to the other listener. So I can't tell yet. Like in my tests, it's all unknown. I can't tell yet if it is a ordering concern where stats is executing before the tunnel is because stats is just running on the internal listener connection, and we might not have done the actual connect request until after stats is executing. So I can't tell if it's that, or I can't tell it's just not in filter state.
Yeah, but Keith, like the SAN shouldn't vary between the inner and the outer. Right, connect is just multiplexed over an already established outer with a SAN.
But in Envoy, they're two separate transport streams, right? So you're going from the main internal listener to the in-cap listener, and the in-cap listener is the one that gets the SAN. We've got to pass that, or yeah, they get the SAN, gets the certificate. You've got to pass that backwards to the main listener. And I'm worried, wondering if the stats filter that's running on the internal listener is completing before we actually do the connect.
So when you say the internal, internal, you mean the TCP connection, the actual TLS connection? Just to make sure we're being consistent about our terms.
Yeah, sorry. So by internal, when I say the stats are executing on the main internal listener, I'm saying that is the, I think it's actually HTTP. It's a raw buffer type of transport from in user space and Envoy from one listener to the other. And that raw buffer does not have. I'm wondering if it's executing, if that raw buffer is executing and stats is running before the in-cap listener is actually doing the connect request.
Can I ask you fundamentally what is a use case and how important is the use case? I mean, it's
So the underlying use case is to be able to see what the principle is of the thing you're talking to.
But why? I mean, that's a question. Why is it so important to know? Because you connect to www.example.com, that you are guaranteed that you connect to someone that has, a valid, secure, whatever it is. Why would you care? Because that's the whole premise is that we take care of guaranteeing that whatever you intended to use is valid somehow.
It's for metric purpose, right? Because in this case, there's only one reporter.
Yeah, but we define the metric. I mean, it's not necessarily. I mean, that's a metric we defined for sidecar where it was trivial to do it, but it's not necessarily a fundamental thing that everyone provides. I mean, the actual. I mean, I don't know any server that log the actual SAN or common name or whatever detail of the certificate in each request or has metrics. OpenTelemetry doesn't have it. It's just one of the high cardinality things that were convenient and maybe not that necessary in. So instead of bending backwards to implement something that Istio sidecars had, we should look at, is it something that users actually need to know what is the exact, because it's never reported in normal HTTP.
John, you're up next on the queue.
You can respond to that. I was just going to ask, does Envoy even actually verify the SAN properly? Like, I forget what the last date was. Or we're doing kind of a wildcard prefix match on the namespace for the trust domain or something.
So Costin, I understand your point, but we kind of already spent a bunch of time litigating that, right, when we talked about telemetry. And this, right, recording this was part of the agreement for telemetry. Right, particularly like if you have direct to workload connections, not to service names, right, you will vary SANs and identities, and they should actually be recorded for audit purposes. Right, remember, it's not just telemetry, it's also logging, right, including audit logging for security purposes. And then that does matter, right? We also know that we can have different identities be part of the same service, right? We allow that. Kubernetes allows that. You could debate whether that's a security bug or not, but people probably need to know that from an audit standpoint. Right, so like regardless of whether this is going in metrics, it needs to go in a log. So we still have to solve the same problem. So I still think we have to look into this. The workaround that Quat suggested, which is basically, if you can't figure it out, assume a default based on what the control plane tells you. It's not the worst short-term fix, right, for the release, if we can't figure out how to actually make this work in the data plane, but we should be able to make this work in the data plane. Right, and there's also no reason why, and Keith, you kept using the word listener, but I don't know why you're using the word listener. Like, we're talking about clusters, right, and abstracted clusters, or I guess loopback listeners, or whatever, internal listeners. But there's no reason why that shouldn't propagate, right? Because we already did for the first layer. If you didn't have that, right, it was already present. So that's just a gap.
So I'm bringing up listeners because, again, this is my understanding of what I've been reading on the implementation in Envoy. From what I understand, there are separate filter states for the communication because they're internal listeners. I'm just saying the connection starts with one listener, goes to another listener, and that listener, that second listener goes out to the connect. The filter state in the between each one of those seems to be distinct, and I think that's where the missing propagation is. Like we need to propagate the information that the cluster gets for the SAN, because it's all stream data. It's all stream information that the cluster gets when it does the communication.
Okay. So Quat's not here, but maybe we could get a thread going about this in Slack where we get some of the more detail, and we can try to pull in other Envoy expertise that's not currently in this meeting to try and resolve it.
Sure, I've posted. I've got draft PRs up on Istio, and Istio proxy, and I can link those for folks who want to take a deeper look at it. I'll put them in the meeting notes.
Okay, yeah, let's just get the right heads involved. If we have to do the control plane workaround, then obviously that needs a separate assessment of complexity. But given what we said about telemetry and the single reporter goal for the beta, we do have to resolve this. Would everyone agree with that statement?
If resolves imply also means maybe not, then I completely agree. I mean, not support it. Not support this particular thing because it's not realistic. That's
well, it would break all the telemetry custom.
Telemetry changes anyway. I mean, it's not going to be 100% identical. There are exceptions.
It would break all the destination reporting.
Do we have to resolve it for 122, or can we
I think
do
so.
it post it?
Based on all the discussion we had.
For 1.22.0 or for 1.22?
Like, we can treat it as a bug. Ouch. Right? Like, Kiali will break. Like 100%.
I don't think it will break from just one.
To be clear, we have all the other destination stuff through implement metadata. It's just the principle. That's the only thing.
It's just the principle. Oh, okay. Then Kiali probably won't break.
I don't think Kiali will break. It will. It does report destination principle. If you select, a node, it will tell you what it was. But I don't think it will just crash anywhere. So even a dummy value or something like that would, I believe, be sufficient for not causing a problem, a bad problem.
That's good.
Keith, what other metadata is filled out, right? Because if we don't know destination principal, we also don't know destination workload name.
Well, no, so for workload name and service, etc., we're using input metadata from the control plane to give us that from what I'm seeing in the waypoint code.
Well, if we know workload name unambiguously, we would have to know principal name unambiguously from the same set.
We could, but we don't. And how we do it. So how it's structured today in Envoy is that at the endpoint level, you have the workload metadata, but the SANs is not in the endpoints. It's only in the cluster. And so, yeah, that's where we get part of it, but not the rest. So could we go shove it in there and pull it out? Yes, that'd probably be the right way to do the not getting it from the wire approach.
Right.
That seems like a valid option. I don't remember. We're reporting something that's not unknown, Keith. What is it? Is it the source principal instead of the destination? if we're reporting the wrong value, then at the very least, just sticking unknown for the short term should be a 1 minute fix. In the meantime, if we can't get anything out for a .0. But
yes, I think we're reporting something wrong. It's either the waypoint principle or it's the source principle. And yeah, it's a simple change to make that unknown.
Okay, well, in that case, I think it's perfectly reasonable to ship without it and just have it as a bug. But yeah, we should report that as unknown and just treat it as a bug for a patch.
Cool. Yeah, there's still a little time. It'll probably take. It might take somebody with a lot more Envoy experience than me a little time to figure out the right way to do it. But yeah, if it's a longer thing or requires more changes in Envoy, then yeah, I can put up a PR to just set it to unknown for now, and then we can iterate from there.
Yeah, I don't think there's no security downside to putting it into the metadata, right? Like the security downside would come in like doing identity verification during the handshake, which we can take up separately. But I don't see any additional security risk by reporting the principal that we have registered with the control plane as the endpoint.
All right, I think we're good. Let's move to the next topic because we only have 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
John, you want to lead this topic?
yeah, do you want to open it up?
I can present it. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, so what this is trying to formalize what is the beta scope for Ambient 1.22, as in what's going to be beta, what's going to remain alpha. The intent here is that some form of this will make its way onto the Istio.io docs, but I was excessively verbose here, and we probably don't want all this information on the docs. I just want to clear up any ambiguities that we may have in our own internal discussions. So I think everything here is what we've been talking about for the past few weeks. So hopefully there's nothing controversial, but we can go through it and debate on various items. I don't know if people just want to read it or me to say it out loud, but I guess I'll skim through it and you can space me out if you prefer to read. Basically, like you can install Ambient, you can enroll things into the L4 mesh with this label, which will send all traffic to the ztunnel. That will do MTLS via HBone, authorization policies for L4, metrics for L4, access logs for L4. And we only support the Istio CA for certificates and only the newer in-pod Kubernetes mode. Then for waypoints, we also support waypoints. You can make these with gateway objects, usually through Istio, but you can do it directly. Can enroll things to use the waypoint with the use waypoint label on service pods or namespaces. Waypoints created with kubectl are supported. Yes, Costin. The Istio I think is a helpful command, but it just ultimately spits out a gateway that you can apply, or you can handwrite it if you don't like tools. So I included both of those as supported. Just because it's supported doesn't necessarily mean we'll have great documentation for it, but I'm not against it. I just okay, policies. Authorization, request auth, telemetry, WASM. These are all attached by target ref to waypoints or to service to impact a single service. Although like telemetry and WASM are alpha, so it's not like we're making those beta. So the attachment of the alpha resource is beta, but the resource is alpha, so it's like the min. You can also attach routes to service for the waypoint. We get the standard telemetry metrics, sans possibly destination principle for now, depending on that discussion. Traces, access logs, all the standard stuff is produced for waypoints. I'll pause if there's any questions. It's really more interesting what's in the not beta section probably, but still useful to go through here. For tooling, we have the Istio subcommands for ztunnel and for waypoints. I put these in beta, but because I feel like Istio commands kind of are outside of the feature status, like there's experimental, these are all under experimental. So whether you want to call them beta or not, I don't really know. But I put them here. So we have commands that just kind of operational commands to dump state of things and do various things. All these are optional, just for troubleshooting or for ease of use. For Ingress, we support Ingress gateways connecting to things that are enrolled in ztunnel. So that would do like MPLS, for example, or HBone. The Ingress will not actually go from Ingress to a waypoint to the backend. It will go directly from Ingress to the backend. Some more discussion on that below. For egress, like you can directly send out of pods to anything, google.com or whatever, but there's no egress gateways. Again, more discussion on that below. We're only supporting single cluster, which obviously implies single network as well, and only greenfield, so no sidecars coexisting with ambient. And that's greenfield mesh specifically, so it's fine to enroll in an existing Kubernetes cluster, just no sidecars. Traffic from, I already said that, traffic from Ingress is supported. Yep, Justin, go ahead.
Just curious, has there been a decision made about what we're doing for authorization policies for waypoints when they connect to the ztunnel? There was some question whether we had to like explicitly allow them, like what the trust model was there.
Yeah, so we added an option. Stephen added an option to do like a implicit allow the waypoint.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that case is handled then.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay. Thanks.
Yes, Carl.
Would that greenfield change in the future?
Yeah. So all of this is intentionally somewhat downscoped.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's lots of things we want to add. Probably some of it is not implemented at all, and some of it's just we're not confident calling it beta. So I'll actually go into those below because I think it's more useful to say what's missing.
Yeah,
so
I was just looking toward the future where we've already got Istio in production. And it's like, I really don't want to create new clusters and migrate over. So, okay,
yep,
that's fine.
Yeah, 100%. It actually works decently well. We're just not confident calling that beta yet. So that's definitely in the near future.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so the things that are remaining at alpha that hopefully in the upcoming releases we start to work on more is multi-cluster support. These are things, by the way, that have some support, but they're not alpha, or sorry, not beta quality. So multi-cluster, DNS proxying, sidecar interop, IPv6 and dual stack, SOCKS 5, Istio APIs. So this one may be slightly controversial, but we're not supporting the virtual service at beta quality, only HTTP route. So we're kind of having a forcing function for usage of the gateway API here. That's largely due to desire to get people to use the newer API and consolidate our testing efforts. And then we said the waypoint 4 annotation is also alpha because it's kind of niche and we're not sure if it's going to move around to gateway class or somewhere else. And then finally, things that will probably exist, but we just actually haven't not implemented anything at all. Multi-network egress gateways, ingress gateways talking to waypoints, VM support, alternative for ztunnel things like metrics, logs, certificates, sandwiching in any way, shape, or form for sidecars, ingress, waypoints, whatever. Not Istio gateways as waypoints, and kind of arbitrary customizations on waypoints. So you can do things like add custom listeners and whatnot. So that's a big dump of stuff. Open the floor for questions, I guess. Statements. Yeah, Carl.
How about FIPS support?
Yeah, so both envoys, which there's no change there really, in ztunnel have the ability to be built with FIPS compatible Cypher suites and libraries and whatnot. Istio as an open source offering is not offering FIPS compliance or certification or various other FIPS _word things, but there's the ability to make it happen.
Okay, so we'd have to do a similar process with Ambient to build it with FIPS support if we needed.
Yep, it should be the same as if you're doing something with sidecars, with the exception that now you have to do it for 2 different data planes, Envoy and ztunnel, but they both have the same ability to be built in that mode.
Yeah, we currently do it for the old school sidecar stuff. So, all right, cool. Thanks.
Hey, John, just had a quick question. When sandwiching is added to the project, that's not effectively a user-facing change, right? That's sort of an implementation detail?
Depends what we do. It will. I think we probably will not, as the out-of-the-box default that you get with Istio, use sandwiching. So it would just be an option that advanced users or vendors or people that want to plug in Nginx or something like will start using. The default won't impact it. But certainly if we find that sandwiching is amazing and universally better, we could implement that. Even then, it would still be minimal change to the user experience, but it would be more like obviously if the infrastructure changing, the troubleshooting flow becomes different and whatnot. So it's not invisible, right?
Is there a doc on sandwiching? And it sounds like maybe our perspective on it has changed in the last month or so. I don't want to hold everybody up, but I would love to catch up.
Go ahead, sorry, Lee.
Yeah, the waypoint capture doc talks about it a lot.
Okay.
I wouldn't say our position on sandwiching has changed, right? It's an integrator-facing feature, right? It's not a user-facing feature, really. It was always an integrator-facing feature. We obviously need some infrastructural APIs to help with enablement of that, probably tied to gateway class. Quite a lot of work to support it has been done already. But I don't think you could consider the feature implemented even at maybe at developer level, certainly not alpha. Right? With a little bit of work, you could test it. How about that? As an integrator, you'd have to do some stuff. But there's a lot of the moving parts are there.
Thank you.
So it's just, I don't think it's something we would put in release notes per se, right? It's something new for the project as well, right? Hey, do we put integrator-facing features in release notes? But yeah, I don't think our basic attitude has changed. But yeah, if you have questions, just take a look at the capture doc or thing in the channels. Keith?
Yeah, I was just going to add that maybe a good way to think about sandwiching and other things like that. Integrator-facing feature is a good one. Another one is it's the specification part of Istio, where Istio is not just user-facing, but also with sandwiching, with the proxy protocol stuff, the custom waypoints. It's also like a developer platform for people to develop against and implement the specification. So TBD what we call it in docs, but that I think there should be some documentation space for it. Just what form remains to be decided.
Yeah, there should probably be an integrators section that describes it. I think that's fair. And certainly the conformance doc needs an update, which actually ties into the status message stuff that I think that is another thing that we are actually missing, John, right? On some of the resources.
Is that primarily for the authorization policy, or are you thinking
any resource attached by target ref should have a status. I suspect we probably don't have complete status or as much status on the gateway resources we would like for waypoints. I'm pretty certain of that, actually.
Yeah, there's definitely, there's always more you can add, but there's definitely not enough. So are you saying that should go on the not implemented list?
Yeah, I think that should go in the not implemented. Yeah, status conformance to the gamma spec is probably the best way of describing it for user consumption, I guess. Again, probably more an integrator concern than a user concern, but it overlaps.
And status is the user, conformance maybe for vendor?
Well, no, status is also for vendor because it's part of how the integration works.
Oh, right, for the gateway. Okay, I was thinking Austin policy status, which is, yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, it covers both. attaching an L7 policy to ztunnel, right, should probably produce a status, right, telling you that you did a bad thing. So we need some of that stuff. And actually, one thing we have to figure out as a TOC is how we treat API progression for status and stabilization. We don't have a lot of control, right? You can't independently version status in the resource. So you're kind of locked into whatever status schema you produce once you start producing it on that version of the resource. But on the other hand, we haven't created any inbound dependency on status yet. So you could actually incrementally add status in hell, even patch releases in theory, and treat them as bug fixes. We haven't actually decided what our posture is on that. It might be to the benefit of the users to actually do it in patch releases, but we have to understand the API ramifications of doing it. The statuses that would be used for integration obviously require more thought than user consumed status. But ultimately, status will be consumed by tooling and will become some form of API. Just be a little careful. John, I don't know if you added it. I can go add it to the doc.
I didn't add it yet, but I added it in my notes to
okay, yeah.
up, so I can take care of it.
Of everything in here, most of it is pretty straightforward. Probably the most interesting one is ingress to waypoint versus ingress direct to workload. Right, and the fact that right now we're doing ingress direct to workload. I think it's the right choice. It's also what we can ship. But there are pros and cons on that, both sides of that discussion, for sure. And there is a ramification also in terms of authorization policy, right? Just like there would be with Sidecar today, which is part of the reason why that's okay, but people should understand what that means.
And that ramification is basically that you're going to have different policies applied based on whether the traffic is originating outside the cluster and traversing ingress or inside the cluster and traversing the waypoint.
Yeah, and if you use an allow policy, like ingress is just another identity that's going to talk to your service. And so if you use a policy and triggers you into deny by default, you can deny the ingress, right? And you should then go and authorize it using an allow.
Okay. And that's a feature, not a bug. It's a very good feature because
it's zero trust.
You want to apply. Yeah, you want to apply very different rules for stuff from the internet, from the wild internet, and from the mesh.
Yeah. As some people like run a lot of rules in their ingress, and they're fine. Like everything coming from my ingress is safe. Okay, but you have to go set that up manually. I generally agree with what Costin said. John, do we want to segment of the not yet implemented? Right, obviously there's some nuance. There's actually quite a bit of code for some of these things. Like I suspect ztunnel works on a VM.
Yeah, I mean, you can do a lot of stuff. Like we just don't have any docs or tests or that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Like the intent of this alpha not implemented was just to spell out the things so that there's no ambiguity of did we forget about DNS proxying and it's implicitly beta, or no, we didn't forget, it's not beta. So
yeah, maybe not yet implemented is just roadmap.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes more sense.
Okay.
John, I added a comment up top. What about upgrades? What are we saying about the viability of that?
That's a great question. Big miss here on the doc. That's important.
We do have some doc, by the way. It's a Helm-based upgrade. I put a link in there. The only thing is for the ztunnel upgrade, we recommend node quota. So yeah, read on that. Let us know we don't currently have upgrade using Istio Cato, but I think Ben, you contribute the Helm upgrade doc.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Without, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. What was the question though about it? Yeah, it's there. We have
No,
one.
it's the upgrade doc. I think the question is, do we have doc? The answer is yes. Now, is the upgrade, do we consider upgrade beta? That's the question.
Yeah, it's in place with traffic disruption.
Yeah, so what I would say for my initial bid for beta is that the upgrade from alpha to beta is not supported. So there's not necessarily a zero downtime from 1.21 to 1.22 because we made all sorts of breaking changes. But moving forward, it will be supported. So 1.22 to 1.23, for example. There are some caveats on the traffic flow because replacing ztunnel is tricky. I think that's orthogonal from whether it's supported or not. Like you can upgrade, there's just implications to live upgrading a running node, just like you would have with some other projects potentially. Just like you do to some extent if you live upgrade Istio sidecars without revisions, although it's a very different story. And the nice part about that as well is we have a bit of time before people will need to upgrade to 1.23, so we can make it even better, although they do need to be able to upgrade for patch releases for sure.
I would call out too. I think Istio CNI upgrades are still very much TBD. Like we haven't really talked about how to do that, and that's potentially more fraught even than some of the data plane bits because that actually mutates node state. So for beta to beta upgrade, we should probably address that. It's not important right now, but that's the big one to me to get right.
But I'm hoping it's still CNI upgrade because the CNI is not in the data request flow. So hopefully, the bar is lower too.
Yeah, it should be easier to do without traffic disruption, but actually in terms of us writing the machinery to do it safely, that's the part that I think we need to do.
Got it. Okay.
And Mitch, you were asking specifically about upgrade, not migration.
Yes, that's correct.
By the way, Keith has a good question on waypoint upgrade. So I don't think we have doc for that. We only have doc for the control plane, ztunnel, and CNI upgrade. So I don't know if Mitch, what do you think the status should be? You did a lot of work on that.
Yeah, so what's documented right now is completely in place, which as far as I can tell, means that as soon as the control plane is upgraded, the waypoints and gateways will all implicitly upgrade as well. That is a real in-place upgrade. It's probably not the flow we want to advocate for most of our users. So I can try to prioritize in the next couple of weeks. Let's see, when is our launch?
In 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks.
Okay. I can try maybe even this week to add a section on non-in-place upgrade or revision-based upgrade for waypoints. Obviously, CNI doesn't yet really have a revision-based story. But I can also, it looks like there's some cleanup we can do on this doc as well. There's some duplication and whatnot. So I can take that on.
That's great. John.
Yeah, so I think the overall story on the upgrades is that the support that we want to ship with beta is there. There is lots of room to improve on the documentation of it, which would be nice to have right away. But again, no one's upgrading on day 0. There's longer term plans for like better zero downtime stuff that's easier and hands-free, whatever, for ztunnel. But I don't think that's a beta blocker. Like we have a documented way to do it. We tell you how to do it without downtime. Not super easy. It's very easy to do it if you can accept connection being terminated for a couple milliseconds. I think that's a fine state to be in, personally.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to see the waypoint side, improved out before our first patch, but we should have, approximately a month before that. So we've got time.
Yeah, what actually currently happens with waypoint right now?
So it's tied to a revision. So if the revision changes, then it will go redeploy it. We'll spin up a new deployment and then roll out according to your PDP or whatever configuration. So I think, Mitch, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no issue with the revisions. It's just we don't document how to use them for waypoints.
No, revision, I mean, I haven't tested it since November, but revisions and tags, last I knew, worked very well. We have some tests for them with Ambient. And we even have that reference architecture for doing this with Argo that heavily uses revisions and tags for waypoints. So it's just a matter of adding some instructions about that to the doc or some references to that. The way that the doc is working would technically be upgrading the default revision implicitly and causing all of the waypoints to immediately upgrade.
Yeah, so the difference, so waypoints work the same as the Kubernetes gateways, the Istio Kubernetes gateways. I mean, it's literally the same code. The difference from the Istio gateways, the manually deployed ones, is that as a user today, you have to go roll out restart deployment. Istio automatically does that with the automated deployment ones. So other than that, it's fairly similar.
Well, so just specific, if we don't have it, if we have no revision-based control, which we expect most users to be, because each waypoint is an independent deployment, the pod disruption budget doesn't really have an effect fleet-wide. Like every waypoint will restart.
That is correct.
Okay. They'll do it pretty quickly, but it's a large blip rather than a lot of small blips.
Yes, there's lots of room for improving operations.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I think long term, what we probably ought to do, and I can begin working in this direction, is one central doc that really talks about how to structure your tags and revisions. Regardless of whether you're on Waypoint or sidecars, that strategy can be pretty consistent. I think there's a lot of overlap there. And then the particulars of ambient upgrade with waypoints are not terribly different. The primary difference is that you don't need to manually restart workloads. It happens automatically. Your intent is enforced automatically, you might say. So having larger documentation around like good ways to structure. A lot of times I'm hearing users even on like Istio Slack reach out, say, okay, I've already installed Istio. I'm up and running in production. Now it's time for me to upgrade. Let's go. And that's probably the wrong time to be thinking about it. Instead, helping them think about like structure all of your workloads into tags and revisions using like say a channel model or a blast radius model, and then proceed with the upgrade. There's a lot of work that's to be done ahead of time effectively that affects workload labels and things like that.
Okay, yeah, we'll just see what kind of feedback we get with, hey, all your waypoints are about to restart right in the night, right? But they should restart quite quickly. Is it a swap in place or is it a start and then drop?
It's a deployment restart, so it will spin up new ones, and once they become ready, tear down the old ones. The old ones will,
okay, yeah,
they have some draining period, and they should send go-aways and whatnot. So it shouldn't be too bad.
That's actually pretty good, I think. Right, people will see a spike in resource consumption then, but that's okay. That's way better than a blip in traffic, like a large instantaneous blip in traffic.
Yeah, if they're doing a lot of TCP stuff, that'll be of course, but
yeah, that's kind of a given.
That's actually true with typically the in-place upgrades with Envoy too, because generally most in-place upgrades, the XDS changes and triggers a drain. So it's basically doing the same thing. It's just within Envoy instead of across pods. So it's really not so different.
Okay. I think we're good then.
So next time we meet, it will be the last meeting before the release. And then because the meeting after that will be the 15th. So just wanted to call that out.
This is very true.
Yeah, it would be good to get full sign off on this probably this week so that we know what we're going into it. It sounds like we I haven't heard any objections, so it sounds like we're trending in the right path. I'll make a few updates from this. I put Oz the required approvals on everyone on the TOC. If you have opinions and might want your name with a checkbox, feel free to add yourself. The more the merrier, I suppose. But particularly here, that has an empty checkbox is Mitch. So if you have a chance in your free time, would be appreciated.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty comprehensive list and description of the state. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah, very good. We're probably going to use this content in the Ambient blog when we announce Ambient goes to beta. All right, we have very limited time, folks. We need a lot of help with docs. So if you have cycles in the next 10 days, would appreciate as help review or help create some content.
Yeah, if people have docs they want reviewed, you can feel free to ping me. I'm happy to be the primary doc reviewer or one of the primary doc reviewers. All right.
Likewise, I'm also happy to help on docs.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.